thankfully. None of us in the room have experienced food insecurity or hunger, so God bless us all for that. And the same thing I expect to happen for 3.3 billion people who do not have access to healthy diets. Food security is a very interesting subject. It is a socio-political, economic, religious, cultural thing, but above all, it is more of a logistics and distribution issue. Because there are three key facts I'm going to tell you. So when you look at the total amount of food in the world, and you divide it by the number of people we have enough calories available, more than 3,000 calories per person per day, which is much more than what is required for sustenance. But at the same time, you have 3.3 billion people who can't afford healthy diets. You have 800 million people, or 780, depending on whose number you trust, who go to sleep or not at all hungry. Then you have $400 trillion of the wealth in the world, which gives you a per capita of $22,000 per person. But even then, we have 50% of the world population which is under poverty. So a lot of contradictions are there. The amount of food which we have today in the world, despite having 30% or 25 to 30% under food wastage, or another, say, 30% which is not having enough productivity, but even this kind of food is sufficient to feed 9.7 billion people. It's just that the right amount of food at the right price, for the right nutritional values, to the right people at the right price is not available. So with that background, I would like to tell you that we have a very, very strong panel. I'm sure this is being recorded and this will remain available for all the audience for now and forever. We have representation from the Government of India at a very high level, as high as it can get in the administrative scheme of things. We have CGIAR, which has been doing, I'm being very frank, they're doing probably much better job than many other multilateral bodies with 8 times their budget. I have on my right, my elder brother, Rajesh, who has looked at agri-investment with Rabo, which is one of the large agri bank from Netherlands. He has been doing agri-investment when people did not differentiate between agriculture and other subjects. So, and then we have a very able representation from 2 most populous nations of Nigeria and Indonesia. So when I combine the Nigeria, Indonesia, and South Asia and India, we are here talking about 2.7 billion people, or 30% of the global population. So that is the kind of strong representation we have here. So with that, and with the lady first, I have my initial query or askance will be to Tamina to tell us a little bit about more about what CGI are doing, how long they have been here, and how you see the recent outlook in terms of food crisis or hunger, and what the recent seas, climate, conflict has improved or made the situation worse. Over to you, Tamina.
Okay. Can I use this? Okay, great. So thank you very much. Great introduction, and I'm really grateful to be on such a fantastic panel, incredibly powerful. So looking forward to the discussion today. I think you raised a couple of really good points about initial stats and statistics, right? 780 to 800 million people living in hunger. 350 million are living in extreme hunger. And I think what we're not understanding is how inextricably that is linked to climate change. You talk a little bit about how we should have enough food to feed the world, but what we're not recognizing potentially or not discussing enough is that our food systems globally are potentially not as resilient as they could be, and they're not as responsive as they need to be if we're going to face the climate change challenge. So here's a few stats that for those of you that are up on stats. So a 2 degrees Celsius warmer world would expose an additional 189 million people to hunger. And an additional 1.8 billion people will be exposed to hunger if we hit a 4 degrees centigrade warmer scenario. And so to get to my point around food systems, we have to recognize that when I talk about a less resilient food system, it's not just the growing of crops. You know, the farmers are doing an incredible job, but it's about how we transport food, how we process food, how we trade it, how we store it, how we consume it, and what we choose to consume. And that's what's sort of fueling the climate crisis, right? So agriculture as an industry accounts for almost 30% of GHG emissions around the world. And if you look at lower and middle income countries, it comes up to about 70%. So it's an incredible challenge for countries like those in South Asia. And we have to be able to, and we're also one of the largest, agriculture as an industry is one of the largest drivers of deforestation and land degradation and biodiversity degradation. So this idea of food security and climate change are really incredibly intrinsically linked, right? So I want to just present kind of a couple of things that CGIAR is doing. So for those of you that are not familiar with us, we're known as CGIAR, not CIGAR, and we are the world's largest publicly funded agriculture research institute. We work in about 80 countries, and we're about 10,000 employees that have 12 research centers around the world. And we work with about 3,000 partners globally. So we don't do anything alone. We work very, very closely with national governments, with state governments, and with the private sector and civil society around the world. And here in South Asia, that couldn't be more true. So here's a couple of things that CGIAR has been working on, and then I'll talk a little bit to answer your question. So we've been developing things like climate smart crops. So you talk about rice, you talk about wheat, you talk about maize, potatoes. We've been developing right from the seeds climate smart crops that are more tolerant of flood and more tolerant of drought. And yet they are allowing us to produce 30% higher yields. So that productivity piece comes into this. We've also been developing more sustainable farming practices. So, for example, we can talk about zero-tillage maize, or we can talk about direct-seeded rice that allows us to grow rice without actually having to use little to no water to transplant it into the ground. And that's a huge accomplishment, especially in a country like India, where we are facing such a reduction in our water tables. And then the other thing we're doing is in the area of digital agriculture. And here we're using satellites, we're using drones, we're using artificial intelligence to actually be able to map weather patterns, to be able to map changing weather patterns based on climate change, and to actually work directly with farming associations and farmers to think about what crops they should be planting, when they should be planting, and to actually plan for a more successful harvest. But I would say that one of the key issues here is that there has not been enough money invested in research and innovations. And that's where I think the crux of the challenge that you've put forward to us is that, yes, there are enough financial flows around the world to feed the world, but we are not perhaps investing in the right places to create that resilient food system. And so we need to be more focused around investing in research and innovations. And then the second piece to that, I would say, is where we need to be partnering with private sector and private organizations. One thing we need to be doing is actually partnering with private sector organizations for scaling opportunities. Organizations like mine can only do so much research, and we can only develop so many innovations. And then we need private sector to be able to take that out larger and scale. And then the other area where there's opportunities for private sector to get involved, and I was chatting with some of my colleagues here, is areas such as impact investment funds, asset management funds that are focused on impact investing, even things like crop insurance and new risk mitigation schemes for farmers and farming associations that can help them to be more confident in taking a risk on some of the other more resilient opportunities that may be available for them. So I'll just stop there, and thank you for the opportunity to kick us off.
But that's very nice. I think the resilient food systems transformation in terms of investment, research, technology, gender, youth, women, and also in rural infrastructure is, of course, one very underappreciated, but I think the right thing to do. With that, I will like to address this focus to Mr. Rohit Singh, who is the Secretary of Department of Consumer Affairs, and he has a very difficult task of keeping the largest population in the world of 1.42 billion people having access at all times of affordable prices, not only of food. So of all items. So and inside food, his basic job is to keep the prices in check for the largest population in the world. So that's just to put it in perspective. Sir, I have along with the opening comments, I would like you to little bit elaborate on India's journey from the days of 1950s, 60s of food insecurity, when we were given wheat for food aid with the support of CGIARs that time in the seed research as well, I think, to now when India is exporting close to $50 billion worth of food. So a little bit, if you can touch upon that. Over to you.
Right, so thank you very much for calling me here and for expressing the right sympathy for my job. It's a tough ask to maintain a balance between the interest of the farmer and interest of the consumer. So I'm Secretary Ministry of Consumer Affairs.
And the trade as well.
Trade will come to later. So as you very rightly said, there are two fundamental parameters, the affordability and availability. So if you look at the way agriculture production is distributed both within the geography of India and both globally, there are issues which are both temporal and spatial. By temporal, I mean the availability has to be ensured throughout the calendar. And sometimes, I'll give you an example of onions because that's my favorite subject. Onions, suddenly next month you will see a glut, but in August, September, you will have the Reserve Bank governor breathing down my neck saying, Rohit, it's going up, so what are you doing about it? So the issue of availability across the calendar and the issue of availability across the geography, those are the challenges, because as we speak, in Nasik, onion is 12 rupees a kg, but in Guwahati, it is 50 rupees a kg. So we monitor, we work for the country, so we monitor the prices every day from 550 points across the country, 3 locations within that district. So we get 550 into 3 into 22 commodities, those many data points every day. And we have a dashboard and we see how the trend is and what are the interventions that are required to keep the prices under control. We have some levers at our disposal, but sometimes there are challenges which are spread across the globe. There is geopolitical situation in Ukraine and Red Sea and Iran-Pakistan border and God knows where. And every time that happens, it affects the prices here. Let me give an example. Can I take 2 minutes?
Please.
Example of pulses. Now, we are the largest producer, we are the largest consumer of pulses. Pulses is a part of everyone's diet 3 times a day throughout the country. But we produce 270 lakh tons, we consume the same amount, but the composition is different. Half of what we produce is chana, the gram, but in other pulses, which is tur, masoor and urad, we don't produce as much as we consume. So we depend on East Africa, Myanmar, Russia, Canada for these commodities to bridge that gap. Now these commodities have to be transported from those geographies, and any challenge that we have in terms of transportation or attention in a specific part of the globe, that affects the availability and thereby the affordability here. So we have to keep track of what is the production in Canada, Australia, entire East Africa, Mozambique, Malawi, Tanzania. Then, of course, in Myanmar, for example, urad, the dal which is used by most of South India, is we have a gap of about 8 lakh tons in terms of what we consume and what we produce. And our entire dependency for that is on Myanmar. 99% of my import of, so this also gives rise to tremendous risk and Myanmar governance has issues, so if something goes wrong, then what do I do? So in order to diversify risks, now we are talking to Brazil and Argentina, where agroclimatically the conditions are conducive to produce pulses. So we do all kinds of tweaking in terms of policy, in terms of engaging with other geographies to make sure those two fundamental issues are sane in India, affordability and availability. Now, the moderator wanted me to speak on how from 50s India has, everybody knows the story, everybody knows about the Green Revolution, and what a happy coincidence that Dr. Swaminathan got the Bharat Ratna yesterday, and he was the father of Green Revolution in India. And but there's a catch here, and maybe my friend sitting here from not cigar, CGIAR, can help us solve that, and maybe the honorable experts from the other countries. See, when it comes to rice and wheat, we have done massive progress in terms of productivity, varieties, climate resilience, etc., etc. But pulses, we have not been able to achieve that much success. I'll give you an example. The tur dal, the arahar dal, or pigeon peas, the different names, the crop is about 6 to 9 months. Now, if you have something standing in the field for 6 to 9 months, you are obviously exposed to risks pertaining to temperature, humidity, and everything else. So we need a lot of research in terms of having varieties of pulses which are climate resilient, which are shorter duration, and higher productivity. And GM is, of course, a different ballgame, but we will not touch that here. So, of course, ICAR is doing a lot of research, but I just wanted to make that point that the kind of advancements we have seen in rice and wheat, we have not experienced in pulses. So that's why pulses always remain a little vulnerable. I'm talking of my price management. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
We'll move on a little bit to the finance side now. To Mr. Rajesh Srivastava. He is the chairman of Provis Advisors. But in his previous avatar of 40 years with Rabobank and other banks, he has invested in close to 18, 19 agri-investment businesses which were helping with the food security. So taking a little bit of the finance industry flavor, Dada, tell us what has been your experience of investing in these companies or these businesses? What have been the learnings? What more should be done to invest in these areas which can help the food security, of course, in India, but South Asia in general? Over to you.
So thank you, Sudhakar, first of all, inviting, and also, of course, the ET. And great to be part of this team panel here. Probably I'm the only odd man out banker here.
No, you have the money. You are the most important.
But on a serious note, I think one of the things which one should realize, and I admit to a lot of failure on the part of the banking fraternity as such, is that the bankers have not really got themselves ingrained into the challenges of the agriculture. We've all been rather doing things which are obligatory. We've been, funding this 18% agriculture somehow because Reserve Bank of India monitors, so we give money to tractors and this, that, and the other. But I think Tamina made this point as well. I think, are we really attending to these granular challenges which agriculture has, especially in a country like India, for instance, right? Which is, we suffer from fragmented land holdings, we have all the very, very specific, and not just India, I guess. If you talk of all the global south or the emerging markets, I think many of us have the same problems. Like I worked in Indonesia for a while in my earlier tenure as in Asia, this thing. So I think the point I was going to make, Sudhakar, is that, and I'll come to your thing, what I've done here and all this growth, investing and all. But I must say with all humility that I think it will make a lot of sense if the bankers are really a lot better enmeshed into the whole ecosystem of this, the development, right? What CGI does, for instance, or what other consulting organizations do. I think it's important to recognize that finance is as much of an input as any other. So it's fertilizer, seeds, what have you, even tech. I think you need financing everywhere. Now, by financing, I don't mean that you need to be very vanilla. Agriculture is very complex. And for that, you need complex or structured kind of financing solutions. I think very important. And I think you will realize, sir, that, and I'm sure when you talk to RBI governor, for instance, all the bankers, we are typically going with asset financing, asset-based financing. Where is that understanding of the real, true agriculture or food processing, for that matter, where you need to have cash flow-based financing? Do we understand that? Right? So I think very few, and I've been 43 years into banking, and I must confess that we are probably here. So that's the issue. Coming to your question, and also about a little bit, I touch upon the food security angle. I think one of the things which we are also forgetting in the country, and that pertains to your department as well, when we talk about challenges of moving, not just production, but also storage and movement. I think we haven't, as a country, we haven't really focused on the agri and food infrastructure as much as we have done on urban infrastructure. So I think it's important to recognize that we are awfully short of warehouses. We are short of, we are probably still struggling with micro irrigation. We're still struggling with mechanization. And that's where the money should come in, because unless you have the infrastructure pieces in place, I think how do we talk about production productivity? It's not happening. So that's important, because everywhere we build better roads now. We had beautiful bridges now. We can move, transport, produce grains very well, but we still lack the core packaging. We still are short, right? So I think one of the things which I would do in my next life, or maybe continued life into this, is to focus on this piece. What can I contribute to the agri and food infrastructure? Short, quick thing which I've done in Rabo and before, I think in Rabo especially, I was one of the first founding members of Rabo Bank in India. We set up a beautiful bank brand. Sadly, they've exited India, so I have built up a new platform. I do much the same in a manner of speaking, not boasting, nothing, no comparison. I'm trying to create a small little mini Rabo Bank in India again. That's what I'm doing basically. But having said this, I've done a lot of growth investing so far into minority investments in food and agri companies. I've done some nice companies like Dawat Basmati rice, and also I kind of understand that segment a bit. Warehousing I did, financing modern warehousing. So all of that is important, and I'm happy that we succeeded, being the first fund anywhere in Asia specifically for food and agri. So I'm glad that it returned good money to investors, and they're seemingly happy, and the story goes on. So let me stop here and take
Just
more
before
questions.
we
Sure.
move on, where would you put your new dollars, or is it a secret?
No, not secret. So I would put my new dollars into two things. One, we haven't touched upon anything on early stage and all, but I do recognize that there is a lot of funding gap. I hesitate to talk about funding winter. I don't frankly believe in it. I think there is no winter, no summer. There's enough money actually lying all around the world, frankly speaking. You have a good project, you get all kinds of funds. The question is, who strikes where and how? That's the issue, right? So that's not no winter here. But at the same time, what's really happening is, as I said, the gaps in investing have to be recognized. Startups, unicorns, failures, everything is happening. The problem is that when do you want equity and when do you want debt, when do you want structured debt? I think in the early stage, I would put my money on venture debt, which is a hybrid between debt and equity, because that's a big gap. It prevents early dilution, right?
It's a fair solution for all.
Right. So it helps the entrepreneurs get on to the next stages without diluting too soon. That's why venture debt comes into picture. And the second thing, obviously, my commitment, my passion is to raise a large agri and food infrastructure fund, which is what I'll do. So that's where my dollar will go.
Well taken. Before I move to my friend Temi Adegoyere, who has come all the way from Abuja, Nigeria, a country I love very much. It's a home to 270 million proud Nigerians. Nigeria is a bit like India. You get all microcosm of India there. But it's an open country, full of natural resources. And more than that, which is very interesting fact, is that it is also home to Nollywood. And which is like Hollywood, Bollywood, Nollywood. They have 3,000 movies a year, and they can give good run for money to Bollywood if need be. You should look at that. He has come all the way only for 2 days. We would definitely learn from his insight what is happening in Nigeria. 270 million people with very high population growth. I think it is going to be one of the highest population countries in top 5 soon. What is the situation there on the food security side? How these recent COVID conflicts and pandemics have affected the situation, and what are you doing with your initiatives with the government and private sector there?
Thank you, Sudhakar. Before I start, I just realized that the wrong person on the panel is wearing the cap. I think ideally the cap should belong to you. So let me put that on your head quickly.
Thank you.
Because you're the moderator. So, yes, thank you for the question. Yes, Nigeria, very interesting country. Similar in a number of ways with, India. In fact, typically when I look at the numbers and the indices, I call Nigeria the younger brother of India in a number of ways. Sadly, the food situation is, I would say, it's chaotic, and it's a food crisis situation. In fact, about 3-4 years ago, my organization decided to start a conference, a national conference we call the Food Systems Changemakers Conference. Really out of the need to bring stakeholders together, bring all of the critical actors together, and really talk about the situation of food in the country. And also, interestingly, the new president of Nigeria just basically declared the state of emergency on food and said, the country is in food crisis. And I wrote an article and said, we've always been in the crisis, not just now. And it's quite sad because it's really just not Nigeria that is in this situation. And I was discussing with someone earlier today. I said, food is just the most important thing. We all wouldn't be here if we hadn't eaten today. And how do we make sure that we are able to really roll up our sleeves and be able to really meet this growing demand for food in a very sustainable way? And, there's been multiple shocks that the world has experienced in the last couple years. And, many countries, especially the low-income countries like Nigeria, has really suffered, a lot of that. Shocks around conflicts, global conflicts, of course, conflicts happening in other parts of the world, but also affecting, your domestic processes. Global pandemic, we had COVID, which was really a big one to deal with. We are having climate extremes, and I think she gave a number of threw up a number of numbers around climate issues and how climate is really affecting agriculture, affecting food production. And even locally, I would say in Nigeria, very uniquely. Groups or local terrorist organizations really making it very difficult for farmers to even get to their farms and produce food. So we have a lot of these issues in our hands, and the point is people have to eat. So how do we really grow the food we need and ensure that the food we need are actually available to the people? So again, if I really link this with what the Secretary said, it's really about the issues around affordability and availability. And I would add one there, which is accessibility, and I think those three key things are really very, very critical when you talk about food systems. So for us at Sahel Consulting, we basically, how to transform the food systems across the continent. And if you're able to build Nigeria and transform the food systems in Nigeria, then you're likely going to achieve that system or systemic transformation across the continent. And we're doing that in a number of ways. The first is, I think, the first priority is the need to strengthen businesses. I know a number of people on the panel already talked about production a lot, but the areas of agriculture that we're now also taking a lot of look into is around building businesses and ensuring that agribusinesses are resilient and they're able to respond to many of the challenges that are coming their ways. And they are very critical because without those agribusinesses really implementing the right business models and being resilient in their business processes, it's so difficult for the smallholder farmers to even be able to really, produce, because who then takes over what the farmers are producing from the farms. So we need to make sure that we have very healthily run agribusinesses, and we're really, focused on building this capacity and ensuring that the entrepreneurs have the right skill sets to run their businesses, but they also understand and they're running the right business models, to unlock profitability. And of course, that's also linked to financing. And a number of things we've talked about. In fact, in the last conference we held in Nigeria, one of the things that came out of that as action point is that we need to have a national dialogue with stakeholders or actors within the finance sector for them to really understand what agricultural financing looks like. I think it's different. And if we're going to finance agriculture and finance the development of the food systems that would respond to the food crisis in the world, then the financial sector needs to actually embrace a much more tailored approach to agricultural financing. So that's one thing also that we're pushing up. The second, I would say, is really around governments. People use the word political will, but I say it's more political action. And you see, I'm trying to touch on many of the very systemic things. The government's political action to act and ensure that the right systems are in place to address those issues. And I'll give an example. We started a project with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2020, which was the second phase of an intervention in the dairy sector. Our mandate was very clear to catalyze the development of the local dairy sector in Nigeria, which, of course, has been exposed to a lot of risk in the last 10, 20 years. Nigeria has the largest cattle population in Africa, but we import about 85% of the milk that we consume as powdered milk. And that's a really sad story. So where do we start from? We need to really understand that there's a need to start building the local capacity of dairy households and ensuring that they have access to the right resources to produce sustainably in the country. In fact, the very first thing we did on that project was to send a team of experts and folks within my organization to India to really understudy the Hamo cooperative model and see what we can actually get out of that we can possibly apply to the Nigerian situation. But one of the things, I was speaking about government policies, one of the things we realized very quickly was there was even no strategy or national policy that really regulates the dairy sector. So we don't even know how we are meeting our local demand for milk. The government does not understand that. So if the government doesn't understand that, there is no strategy document, no policy to really guide the actions of the government, then in the end, what is the government really going to do? So we expect very little or nothing from the government. So one of the first things we did was to put in place the right policy. So basically convey the stakeholders within the country and talked about this opportunity, this very huge opportunity and the huge gap it presents. And let's see them to really craft out a policy document for the government in terms of what direction the government should invest over the next 20 years. And we developed what we call the National Dairy Policy, which I'm happy that has now been passed into law. Beyond policy, I mentioned that we do a lot of program or project implementation. One of the things we like to do with our programs, which are really very unique, is to ensure that we're building those programs around private sector involvement. So we have this unique situation of farmers producing and struggling to access market. Whereas you have a lot of private sector companies who are really striving to offtake from local producers, but are really struggling to get access to the right quality or quantity of inputs. So that's it's a little bit of it's quite an interesting situation. So it means that any intervention or initiatives, either funded by the government or development organizations, must really consider this dual approach of building and strengthening capacities of farmers on farm, while at the same time deliberately linking them up with, private sector organizations. So many times we design initiatives that are private sector led or market systems approach, where you're really linking farmers to private sector organizations that are very interested and willing to invest resources, invest their time and effort into backward integrations locally, ensuring that they are buying from farmers. In that way, you're not only empowering the farmers or increasing household level incomes, but you're also encouraging the private sector players, and you're helping them to build the right supply chains, which will respond to the realities of our time. And the last thing that I will talk about is really the need to strengthen existing industry associations and organizations. They play a very critical role in the system. And what I said that is because they had the strongest pathway to getting the government to do the right things. They're also the strongest pathway to getting development organizations and private sector organizations to do the right things. So in our activities and projects, we also try to focus a lot on that. And let me just say this one last thing before I drop the mic. It's really around infrastructure, market. Someone on the panel mentioned that one of the things we've struggled with in our food systems is the ability to get the food even to the market, or to transport the food over very long distances. And one thing we've not done so well in agriculture and food systems is in really deliberately exploring where technology could possibly play a role, and really letting go of those areas and allowing technology to actually, have its course. I think we need to be more deliberate. I started in several sessions today talking about Gen AI and, many of these, emerging technologies. I think we need to be more innovative and embrace technology a lot more to help sort out many of our supply chain and logistics issues, and help really structure our food markets to ensure that even when we produce the food, it gets to the right people. If not, then we produce and a lot of the food will go to waste. What I used to say in many fora like this is many times we're tempted to focus a lot on production increases, productivity improvement on farm, but we've forgotten that roughly about 40% of the food we produce still goes to waste. When I take Nigeria as an example, in the value chains of the highly perishable commodities of like fruits and vegetables, we're talking about over 60%. So it means that to ensure that we have more food available on the table, by basically reducing that post-harvest loss, we are solving very, very huge problems.
So you see, when you give me the cap, how much longer I'll let you talk.
Thank you very much.
With that, I want to move to my friend Insan Shafat. He has come from Indonesia, another large population country, 250 million people. Indonesia is loved by not only because it has India and Indonesia, it also supplies to India a very large amount of, I think, 5.6 or 5.7 million tons of 57 lakh tons of vegetable oil, palm oil. If we all eat 3 times a day, as vanaspati or refined or vegetable oil, so thank you very much for supplying that affordable oil, which keeps our well oiled. He is a director of Partnership for Indonesia's Sustainable Agriculture. It's like a chamber of commerce, which is a partnership between the multinational bodies, corporate and the private and sector. It's about 2.7 million farmers. He's a touch base. Yeah. And so he is grappling with the problems on the ground. So I think we were discussing earlier about the finance issues, blended finance. So tell us some practical issues which you're facing along with the opening remarks, Ihsan.
Thank you, Tomar. And first of all, we love India too. So I feel like I'm learning a lot from all the panelists. So I'm taking a lot of notes here. But yeah, I think financial. But before that, I think we need to understand the complexity of agriculture. And Indonesia is one of the biggest producing countries. And as many other producing countries, the presence of smallholder are essential. They are the essential key of the commodity supply chain. They are the key part of how to increase the sector. Essentially, if you want to increase the sector, let's support smallholder. In Indonesia case, I can just give you a bit of numbers here. For palm oil, if mentioned vegetable oil, and palm oil, which is the biggest commodity in Indonesia, 40 to 45% of the landscape is smallholder. For cocoa, cacao, it's 90 to 95%, and they are smallholder. For rubber and coffee, it's even bigger. 99% of the landscape are smallholder. So that's essentially how big the presence of the smallholder, and that is the reason why we established PISAGRO, the Partnership for Indonesia Sustainable Agriculture. We've been here since 2011, 2012, with the aim to support governments to realize food security. But of course, realizing food security is a big thing. Our focus is to help the supply chain, help the smallholder, how to engage with them, and providing them with the many accesses and their need. So access to market, access to capacity building, access to input materials. Temi mentions about fertilizers, seedlings, and of course, access to finance, which is mentioned by everyone here. And I really like what Tamina and Rajesh said, that there are a lot of money flowing in the agriculture, but there are problems, right? Rajesh mentioned that banking, financial sector needs to understand actually the need on the ground. And that's what happened in Indonesia, and I believe that is happening also everywhere else, right? In Indonesia, I think the success of financial access to the smallholder only comes from the commercial part, which is with the commercial interest rate, which is very high, right? The government provides microcredits, but there are a lot of criteria and requirements for that, which limit the ability for smallholders to get that access, right? To access the finance, I'm sorry. And then we talk about blended finance now, which is, I think we haven't mentioned this, right, in this panel, because blended finance have been a hot topic, Tomar, in the world of agriculture, where we could just bring in investors and then blend it with the existing financial interest of pricing from the banks, and how to make it work to scale up existing projects, and so that we reach out more and more and more smallholder. But then again, blended finance is not easy. I've been having these discussions on blended finance for the past 5 years. Again, probably 10 kilograms per little. Had lots of lunches.
So just to simplify our audience, just give a simple case, what is it, and what are the actual practical
Sure.
problems you're facing?
Sure. So essentially, at the end of the day, if we talk about talking about financial access, at the end of the day, it's three things, right?
Right.
The interest rate,
Yeah.
the tenor, and then the requirements. The interest rate, because essentially smallholders who would then get the loans and essentially pay the pricing and the finance, right, and everything. But then these blended finance sometimes and not often provide not the most competitive pricing, right? Second of all, the tenor. We see that different commodities have different characteristics. We have palm oil who would need probably 4 or 5 years to mature. We need cocoa 3 to 4 years to mature. And we have food crops like potato, rice, which is probably more quickly in short terms, right? But so we need to tailor and cater this blended finance to different crops. And of course, the sustainability part, the criteria of the sustainability. We try to talk with one or two blended finance provider, and then they ask for crazy requirements, such as, you need to, if you want us to help a farmer with 1 hectare, then that farmer needs to conserve another hectare, everyone else. And this is something that would actually make it difficult for the farmer, because farmers are scattered everywhere, and everything else is being planted with different crops. And so it's really hard to find an area for them to conserve where they could actually monitor directly. So those are, I think, essentially the difficult part. But I believe that this blended finance, this finance would come along, and I think it's a matter of disbursement now. I mean, I really agree that the money flows everywhere, but now how to disperse it to the right targeted people, which is the smallholder, which are friends. Thank you.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Just a line to supplement, actually, and because finance, so I can't resist myself.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. The problem, and whoever is doing capacity building, basically also involve bankers build their capacities. That's important from them to understand. What he's saying is right, because ultimately at the end of the day, if you don't understand the problems, the challenges, the commodities, the cycle, seasonality, then what happens typically? What will the bankers do? They'll do 2 things. A, that they will ask for collaterals, and B, they'll increase pricing. And both the things are unwieldy, which he said, right? So it's a vicious circle. You have, to top on the pricing 18, 20, 24%, you're almost as good or as bad as an informal lender. And then you still, you want the entrepreneur or the agriculturist to make money. I think you're killing him. So that's the way it is.
So that has been a very informative round of opening remarks plus some aspect of the food security and the value chain everybody has addressed. I would like to go back to Tamina, and I have this question, I'm sure many of the people in the audience have this, about GMO. So that GMO is like climate change. There are 2 sides. One says there is wrong, there is right. There are people who say, if I'm eating GMO, maybe my children start growing tail. So I frankly speaking, sitting here and being a student of agriculture for a long time, I still haven't made my mind. What is the CGIAR, which is like a primary research body for a very long time, 60 years? Where do you stand? Do you support, or do you feel country like India or Global South should promote and embrace GMO for its or their food security need? I'd love to hear from you.
You decided to go there, did you? Exactly. Very brave, very brave.
You did mention that, don't go there. You poked the bear.
So listen, I'll be very frank.
Please.
I represent a research organization, a science-based research organization. And I don't sit, nor does my organization sit on one side of GMOs or the other. What we do support very much is the right for every government to make decisions based on the evidence. And that's what I would encourage governments to be doing, is to be making policy decisions based on the evidence. Having said that, we, as a research body, as an international research body for agriculture, we work in everything from traditional variety breeding, which brought us through the Green Revolution, all the way to today. And we do also work in GMOs, but we work in the full variety of variety breeding. Now, just to supplement that answer, there are 140 million children, preschool-age children, who suffer from vitamin A deficiency today around the world. They are poor, their families are impoverished, and there is no way that they are going to be able to eat enough carrots or enough other vitamin A-rich foods to be able to achieve that level of to forego that level of malnutrition. You've got similar sort of statistics for children and lactating mothers and pregnant mothers who are struggling with iron deficiencies, with zinc deficiencies, with other micronutrient deficiencies. GMOs are not the be-all and the end-all, but they are an opportunity to look at some of those micronutrient deficiencies. The CGIAR, for example, has invested in a GMO product called orange flesh sweet potato, which has been introduced in many parts of Africa and has been taken up very, very successfully to help prevent that. We've also worked in a product called golden rice, which is, again, vitamin A supplemented. And it has gone through the regulatory process in the Philippines, and the Philippines actually in 2021 became the first country in the world to adopt vitamin A, golden rice. And they are doing small trials for growing it in the Philippines. And these sorts of interventions are not, they're not replacing anything. So in the Philippines, for example, we worked very closely with the national research partners, with national nutrition organizations, to ensure that golden rice was supplementing other micronutrient interventions. Same thing with orange flesh sweet potato in West Africa and in parts of South Latin America, where we worked with the nutrition community to ensure that this was supplementing other efforts at reducing the level of vitamin A deficiency. So, where I come out on is I come out on the side of evidence, look at the scientific evidence and make good policy decisions based on that. I also come out very strongly on the side of those micronutrient deficient children, because we now have scientific evidence to demonstrate that a micronutrient deficient child will not grow as much, will not develop as much mentally, will struggle financially in their lifetime. That's the stuff that I come out on the side of. So.
Oh, very well taken. I think we have to address not only the food security, it's a nutrition security as well as micronutrient security. With that, sir, Mr. Rohit Kumar Singh, I would like to ask, just point out that there has been lately a lot of, since 2022, concern worldwide and Wealth, Hunger, Hilfe and FAO as well. They said that India ranks quite low in the World Hunger Index, 111 on 125 countries. 75% of the population does not have healthy, nutritious food. Then other side, we see India running the largest food security procurement and distribution program to its credit. And government reports no starvation deaths. So how do you, what is your insight in this one? Because on one hand, you have too much negative press, and on the other hand, you see so much good work being done.
So I don't trust those rankings. I mean, we have seen how the rankings are done, and to give a parallel in terms of which university is doing what, which university is the best. I mean, I can give you 10 studies where 10 different universities are ranked the best in the world. So don't trust those rankings. And at the risk of sounding whatever, there are biases in the reporting in the Western world, and many agencies, many media firms, they always not are in favor of India being portrayed as a bright spot for obvious reasons. So don't trust them. We have to look into the methodology. We have to look into as to how they are doing the ranking. And like ma'am said, evidence is, anything has to be based on evidence. And I don't see evidence. You take a sample of 40 people and say, I come from Rajasthan cadre, and I remember this is my 35th year in the IAS. Oh, I shouldn't have told that, but anyway. I'm talking 15, 20 years back, every other year there'll be a study that we have a district called Bara, which is bordering Madhya Pradesh on the southeast part of Rajasthan. That, there is a tribal community called Saharia tribals, and there are starvation deaths. And some 20 officers and 30 NGOs and 50 journalists will descend there to find nothing. So, don't trust these one-off stories. Yeah. And look at the numbers. Look at what Prime Minister said yesterday here at this venue as to how 80 crore, 800 million people under Pradhan Mantri Yojana are being given free food. Now, if you give free rice, free wheat, free, edible oil, of course, the concoction is different in different states. Then, and on the other side, you're talking of starvation. We are providing, this is also the issue of strategic price control. By intervening in wholesale and retail from our buffer, we are ensuring that the prices are affordable. The first principles of affordability and availability. So don't trust them. I mean, you saw those numbers that 25 crore people, 250 million,
250 million.
have moved out of poverty. So what are these guys talking about?
And tell us
And then if with such a vibrant press, including this group here, if there was a starvation death somewhere, there'll be 100 stories in 100, kinds of newspapers. And now with social media, you cannot prevent anybody from publishing whatever they have. It's microblogging. I mean, people will publish it. So all those global indices and indices of, religious tensions and this tension, don't believe them. This is just to portray India in a bad light. Of course, we have to introspect. We have to see. We have our systems of checks and balances. As I said, we collect data from so many points every day. So the decisions have to be based on that. As she said, evidence-based. Not just some anecdotal story coming out of some, small point in the Mediterranean. Don't believe them.
no sampling size. And
I forgot the second question, sorry.
About your large-scale procurement program and distribution
Yes.
program, which is the largest in the world. Yeah.
So you must realize that the kind of procurement we do for our public distribution systems, I mean, the millions of tons of rice, millions of tons of wheat, sugar and everything. And then we distribute it to, and now with the use of technology, which my friend from Nigeria was saying it has to be used, in tracking and tracing the distribution. Now every fair price shop in the country has a POS machine. You have to give your thumb impression there. It gets authenticated by the Aadhaar server, and then only you are given that food quantity. Of course, there will be some minor leakages because, everybody can have, black sheep who want to game the system. But I'm talking of majority, and I can say with a lot of sincerity and confidence that the leakages in public distribution systems have really, really gone down. I mean, we go for surprise checks without telling, and we don't find many complaints in the public distribution system. And plus, it is free. For 800 million people, the food grains are free. What else do you expect a government of a country to do for its citizens who are not that advantaged in terms of social and financial terms? So, but I would go back to Mr. Rajesh's point, Srivastav's point, that when you do these huge procurements, you need very smart systems of storage, you need smart systems of transportation, and we need a very calibrated system of distribution. Now, this chain, and I don't fully agree with him when he said private sector is not implemented. We have now a scheme of silos construction with FCI where it's totally based on PPP, and there are investors from private sector who are doing it. Private sector is not just for management, not just for investment, but for managerial efficiencies also. You took an example, sir, of highways. I have worked in highways for 6 years under Mr. Gadkari. And I can tell you that just by tweaking the PPP model, I joined the sector in 2012. It was going down the drain. And we were just doing like 3,000 kilometers a year. But when this government took over, then we tweaked the model, and that first year we did 10,000, and in 2019 we did 20,000 kilometers a year of high-class highways. Just by tweaking the model of PPP, by de-risking the private sector, taking out the risk of toll collection, and saying that, have a hybrid annuity model where we will take care of the risk. So we need probably similar strategies for that, even for blended finance, as our friend from Indonesia was saying. You can't ask a farmer with 1 hectare to have a sort of a collateral of another hectare or to grow. So you need smart strategies. You need to de-risk the investor. Government has to chip in, but this whole model has to be developed, and it cannot be just copying the models of other countries or other sectors. every sector has its uniqueness. So you need a model which is totally aligned to the interests and outcomes of that sector.
Thank you very much. I think our time is also running out, but one thing which is very clear, and then the whole panel has echoed, is the resilient food systems, resilient investment as well, good public-private partnership, and investment in research and technology, gender balance with youth, and most importantly, all these centers of excellence should talk to each other. They should not exist in silos. So more collaboration, compassion, and at the same time, also good investment in resilient food systems. I think that's what, because if we take those investments, we take the increase in productivity and reduce the 30% loss, and you have food enough for 9.7 billion population. So you are incrementally increasing 50-60%. So I think it's not a very dire situation. It's just that everything has to come together all at the same time for everybody. Thank you very much for listening to us. And if there are any questions, I think we can, of course, we can take offline. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much.